The Nintendo Switch 2 is obviously already available for pre-order, or it was the other day. It's sold out. I wasn't one of the people who was trying to get it, so this is not like a video where it's like, Jay's making this video because he's coping because he couldn't get my beloved Nintendo Switch 2. There's nothing like that. I just didn't really want it at launch. I do actually have an interest in the system, and I do plan to get the system eventually. But I do have a big problem with the system, which is that Nintendo, up to this point, has been very, very good about being interested in the physical games market. And now I do want to say that they still do have a physical games market. They still are going to produce physical games, but I've always been someone who has opted to have the most options for the consumer. The most options for someone buying games or movies or whatever, instead of just leaving those options in the hands of some huge corporation. It's why I don't really prefer things like streaming services. It's why I don't really prefer digital games, but I do advocate for the existence of both alongside physical media. And yet, with the Nintendo Switch 2, a big thing I'm noticing is a push for these things called game key cards, which I'm not going to pretend I'm an absolute expert on. I obviously didn't develop this technology or anything. This isn't leaked documents from the government. But when it comes down to it, Nintendo Switch 2 game key cards are essentially a way to let you buy something physical, but there is really no game on that cartridge, not a functioning game. And then you have to put it in your Switch, and then your Switch downloads the actual game that key card is for. So think back to the Nintendo Switch 1 and how there were certain games where it was like, you might see it at a store if you're one of the people who actually goes outside and touches grass and you make it to the store. You might see a game that says no physical game included, code only in box type thing. I especially saw these a lot of times at Walmart for certain games on the Nintendo Switch. This is essentially the same idea, except now you get a physical little cartridge, like a piece of plastic, which is already a little wasteful if there's not going to be anything on it, that you then put in and it downloads the thing. The positive of this is that you can resell a digital game. So you can take your game key card for one of the many games that is coming out on game key cards. Like, for example, if I were to look at a list of them because they're very, very big, Hitman, The World of Assassination Signature Edition. That's a game key card. Madden 26, a game key card. Split Fiction, game key card. Street Fighter 6, Suikoden 1 and 2, like Bravely Default, the HD remaster. There's a lot of these. And so the idea is essentially if I got Bravely Default's HD remaster, and I got this game key card instead of buying it digitally on the eShop store, well, now what I can do is I can take this key card if I don't want this game anymore, and I can say, hey, Bob, you want to buy my game from me for $20? And he can say, sure. That's an actual positive of this. So I am going to be fair to this. I promise you, there are some positives to the existence of this option. But overall, I think this is a bad step in the wrong direction, and I will explain why. So if you enjoy this video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, I do appreciate that very much. Trying to grow this channel, the YouTube algorithm's been really rough to it lately. So any comment you leave, any like, dislike, even anything does help it out, and I appreciate that. And I do have a question of the day for you, which is, what are your thoughts on all of this? I mean, for me, like when it comes to digital and physical, these key cards, etc., what do you think? For me, I will always advocate for options, for the ability to have physical, digital, streaming, all of it, and for all of it to coexist. CD Projekt Red, who did develop things like The Witcher and, of course, as well, Cyberpunk, they're putting Cyberpunk on the Switch too, and it is actually going to be on the cartridge, not a game key card. It's actually on the cartridge. You pop it in, you can play the game. It doesn't require a download. Now, there are a lot of misconceptions around physical, which we will touch on, but I think the most important information here is that they essentially confirmed 64 gigabytes is the maximum size that these cartridges are right now for the actual on-cartridge games. What that means is, if you know anything about modern gaming, and especially how wasteful a lot of AAA developers are of space, there's a lot of games that will never fit on there. And so the options for those games already are limited to either game key card or digital only, which I'm already not a fan of, and that part is on Nintendo. I don't really see why they couldn't offer an option for bigger cartridges to exist. Another issue I have with this is the fact that apparently every time you go up in cartridge size, it costs more money on the back end of manufacturing for these companies. So say you're Square Enix, and you probably, I would argue definitely, could likely fit Bravely Default Flying Fairy HD Remaster onto an actual cartridge and not a game keycard. Well, what company out there isn't cheap as hell when it comes to cutting production costs? I can't think of many. So what ends up happening here is even a lot of the companies that can fit this on physical, they're now getting an excuse to still have all the downsides of physical games. You have plastic that we're producing, which is bad for the environment. Whether you're a big, whatever you fall in for political whatever, I think there's science that agrees that it's hard to break down these plastics a lot of times. We're unnecessarily producing way too much of it. And it's not really good for our world. So that's already a problem with physical games in general. But I always thought that the positives of it were things like game preservation, being able to own the media, because no one's going to show up at your house with a gun and take it from a company, whereas things can be removed from an eShop or from whatever, like we saw with games like PT, from Konami. It was a very weird case, but it was a game where it was removed completely from the PlayStation Store. And even if you went up to the PS5, it was specifically made non-compatible with that from the PS4, so you couldn't use it on that. You couldn't re-download it if you deleted it. Basically, they tried to erase the existence of that game, and that is something that can happen. And you might say, well, I live in the EU, or I live in Europe, there's consumer protection laws for this, that, and this. Again, I say, what company has ever tried to follow the law and not skirt around it? But even if we take that as true, there are plenty of countries where there's not good consumer protection laws when it comes to digital goods. America being one of them. North America, or the United States, I should say. But I would argue that Canada and Mexico don't have very good consumer protection laws for this either. So a lot of the world doesn't have good consumer protection laws for digital-only games. So now we have these cartridges that only go up to 64 gigabytes as of right now. A lot of companies are not going to want to use them, so they're going to put them on game keycard, which then means that we're producing all the plastic. You're still having to get up, get the cartridge out, put it in your system like a key if you ever want to play the game. So it now has the downside of physical with none of the benefits of physical. This keycard thing. So we now have basically a system that encourages these companies to not spend the extra money because they don't want to. So then you as the consumer are more at their mercy. The internet is still required to download these games, by the way. So if you are someone in a bad area for the internet, which all over the world those still exist, you might live in the nicest place ever for it. I don't really have problems with this, but a lot of people do. This is going to affect you. This is also something that encourages company laziness and cheapness. And the only benefit I see to this is the ability to resell a digital game, which I think is good. That's a positive. I actually do give them props for that idea. But the problem I see with this is because of that size limitation and because of how expensive these actual cartridges are to print to, you're not going to get many companies that actually want to do that. And I have talked about physical ad nauseum before. I've talked about how I do think there's a lot of positives. Are there negatives? Sure. I mentioned the plastic. People mention taking up space as a negative, to which I say, buy a shelf. But fair enough. You live in a very, very small place. I can see why digital would be better. And I'm not making fun of anybody. If you live in a trailer, I can see why you wouldn't want physical games. That's just going to clutter the small space you have, right? That's going to be a problem. But I would argue that in most living situations where people can still afford video games, a shelf is not out of the question. So that's not really a huge negative to most cases, right? But then when it comes to physical, there's all these arguments too, and all these, I think, misguided ones. I don't even think people are trying to lie. I just think they're misguided. Where they'll say, oh, well, name a physical game that runs without updates. Name a physical game where you don't need an update to run the game. What they don't understand is that for the most part, most physical games still work from beginning to end without updates, without DLC, without anything. There certainly are a lot that don't, and you do kind of have to look into that a lot of times, but there's a ton that do, especially remasters, repackages, all this other kind of stuff. And games like from Limited Run, there's a ton of games that still work just fine without any updates. I'm even thinking about things like Dark Souls Remastered. That's an example right off the top of my head of a PS4 game. You pop it in, it runs perfectly fine. Scholar of the First Sin, Dark Souls 2, runs perfectly fine. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are used to these huge AAA games that are sloppily thrown together with the idea of fixing it later, and that's what they've come to expect when it comes to all physical games. So they see something like Madden, and it's on a disc, and they're like, well, this is going to shut down in a year and a half, maybe, if even. There's half the game's going to be gone right there. It's not going to run very well without a bunch of updates. What's the point of physical anymore? And they're not seeing all of the smaller games that still do provide this really, really good on cartridge or on disc experience where, yes, you can download updates for them. Yes, sometimes you can buy DLC for them and it can enhance the game experience, but you could go to the store, and I'm turning around and looking at my shelf, so I'm going to sound a little different. You could go to the store and buy Sonic Mania on the PS4, like a disc of it, and it's going to run perfectly fine with no updates. You could go to the store, you could buy Persona 5 on the PS5. It's going to run perfectly fine with no updates. You could buy a game like Demon's Souls, the remake. It's going to run perfectly fine with no updates.
Elden Ring runs perfectly fine without updates.
Yeah, Jill's in the background, my wife. Elden Ring. That's a huge game that came out just a couple of years ago. Runs perfectly fine without any updates. At launch, it ran well. I mean, yeah, they added some stuff to it. They did change some things over time, but you didn't need that. And so when it comes down to it, there is something to be said about having that 1.0 build of the game, having that disc or having that cartridge or having that thing that just works the way it is, as Todd Howard would say, it just works. And that's the game. You don't need to download. You don't need to go to the internet. And years later, if you want to resell that game, you can. You want to look up what I'm talking about, by the way, go to eBay and look up some retro games. Look up things like Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Look up things like Silent Hill 2 Greatest Hits. I went to Silent Hill immediately because they're some of the more expensive games I can think of. These are games that retained their value and still work to this day. Well, Jay, what about disc rot? What about cartridge rot? These are real negatives. Yeah, absolutely. There is such a thing as disc rot. There is such a thing where physical games can break down over time. The same way, though, that you could say about digital media. Hard drives break down over time, need to be replaced, especially if they're heavily used. That's something I have to worry about every day with my computer. I'm like, oh, geez, this hard drive from 4 years ago, I use this a lot for video editing. Is this going to break down? Do I need to move these files? Those are digital-only files. They still have to be stored somewhere, right? You can say this breaking down thing about anything. And a lot of the times, if you take good care of your stuff, whether it's a hard drive, whether it's a computer, whether it is a physical disc, and you keep it in a decent environment and you're not insane, you're not like the Joker out here running weird temperate controls on your house, cranking it to 90 one day and then 20 degrees Fahrenheit the next day, your stuff is probably going to last a long time and be fine. So a lot of the negatives with physical that I see are either misinformation, like people are mistaken, or they are exaggerated. And a lot of the negatives I see with digital, I truly believe are actual problems. Like, yeah, there's good things, like not having to get up to switch your disc or whatever. Being able to just have that on your hard drive at any time, click of a button, you can go. But when we have a system like the Switch 2, where it's encouraging all of these, I would say AAA games, but even like games that aren't necessarily AAA from non-first party developers at Nintendo, like we're talking third party games, to go with the cheapest option, they're going to pick either digital only or they're going to pick this game keycard thing. And I think a lot of people are going to be misinformed on what this actually is. All this is the negatives of physical with no benefit. It's the negatives of what a physical game would be, but none of the positives, none of the preservation, none of the lack of needing the internet, none of the ability to use it, 10 years down the line when the Switch eShop has shut down. Like, what does happen to these game keycards? I'm genuinely curious about this. I know a lot of the people who just get on their knees for Nintendo. Everything they do is great. They already left this video. They're not going to listen to this point. But what happens to these game key cards in 20 years? Because I have games from 20 years ago that still run, that I could put in something. And I have games from the PS3 generation, like the early 2000s, that still run. You can just pop it in a PS3 and it works. Just like that. What does happen if the Switch 2 shop shuts down at some point? This is why I care about game preservation. I mean, yeah, there'll be people who dump ROMs to the computer. That's great. Then you can download them on PC. It's not legal at that point if you don't own the actual game. People will do it anyway. That's a form of preservation. But what about for people who want to use that hardware in 20 years? Or what about people who, don't have access to a PC that they think can game at that level? What happens to them? I just don't think this is a good idea. I think it encourages laziness. It encourages cheapness. It's going to confuse the hell out of people because a lot of people are not informed on these things, especially moms and dads. So they're going to go buy this thing at the store, which I would argue is just wasteful. And the only benefit I can see to it is that you can resell it. But once you have any kind of issue, like if that shop ever does shut down, these are worthless completely. What are you going to do? It's like having the keys to a car you don't own, Like, what's the point? Are you just going to jingle it around? That's not why people like physical games. People don't like it because they're stupid little animals who can just jingle it around like car keys in front of them, like, a dog seeing a squirrel when it's driving by. That's not why people like physical games. They like them for the positives that I've listed over the years, not just to have some dumb shit on their shelf because they're a hoarder. It's such a misinformed understanding of why people care about these. I just don't understand why I can understand why someone might buy one of these. If it's your only option to play a game, you want to be able to resell it, stuff like that. I don't understand why anyone would defend this being what is going to be one of the primary options, at least at this point, for third-party games on the Switch 2. And for me, this leaves me interested in getting the Switch 2 down the line as a system, and then only buying a handful of Nintendo first-party titles and nothing else. And I almost wonder if that's the goal here. I don't know if that's the goal, but to get you to still want to buy the system and only buy first-party games so they make the most money, but look like they're offering more options and then push the digital front more. I don't really know. But I think this is just another stepping stone in the death of physical media, which I don't think is a good thing. Sometimes I feel like John the Baptist. I'm wandering through the wilderness, screaming what I believe is the truth at the top of my lungs, and everyone just tells me to F off. I truly believe years from now down the line, there will be a lot of people who regret letting things go the direction that they have so far when it gets even worse, when there's fewer options. Because now physical games are going to be more money, too. That's something I didn't even mention in this video. They're doing adaptive pricing model. Some games are more expensive than others, and a lot of games, if there's a physical option, it's an extra $10 on top of what it already was. People are going to regret giving up options eventually. And my point isn't to advocate that you can't have this as an option. My point is that when you have those limitations on the size of the other cartridges and there's so much money on the back end, you're just encouraging everybody to take the cheapest option and hurting game preservation in the path of it, and just dragging along all the negatives that physical does actually have that don't go acknowledged by collectors, but bringing no real benefit other than resale, which has a time limit on it. So I don't know. That's just kind of my thoughts. And I will close with this. Imagine the Wii U had this. I know nobody bought the Wii U, except for me, but imagine that the Wii U had game key discs. Where is the Wii U shop right now? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It's dead. It's shut down. It's gone. What if the Xbox 360 had this and you still wanted to play that? Oh, get a new system. Why are you so poor? Some people like old systems. Guess what? The online is shut down for that. You wouldn't be able to play your game anymore. That's the problem I have with this. Once you download it once, my understanding is you put that game key card in here and you still have it. But if you were the new recipient of this game key card later on, someone resold it to you and you put it in, there's nowhere to download the game from. That's my point. My point isn't you're the first owner of it and you download it and then you put in, you left it on your hard drive for 20 years, you can't use it. You can. But what's going to happen if somebody else buys that from you? The only benefit of this, they'll get nothing. So I don't know. This is kind of a big issue I have with the Switch 2. I'm interested to hear your thoughts down below. I'm sure a lot of people will be like, physical bad, digital good. I love companies. I'm tired of that attitude, and I think it's stupid. And I'm kind of tired of sugarcoating it. So interested in your thoughts. Have a fantastic day. If you want to support something physical that we do sell, we sell coasters, keychains, trays, and more on cosmobunny.shop. Discount code DJAY123. We don't print pictures. What we do is we take comic books, manga, magazines, and more that have damaged paper. We actually repurpose and recycle it and turn it into something new for your home, transformatively in a new medium, and we recycle the rest. Hope you have a fantastic day. As always, everyone, stay shui.